Kerry, good to see you, brother. How you doing? Your first one in today. What up, Miles? What up, CMF? Let's go. Kerry, how you doing, brother? Coaches, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Well, Miles, T, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? JP, good evening. Good to see you. How you doing? Okay, I'm just pinning the live show. There we go. It's pinned. Okay, let's do intro, disclaimer, what we're going to go through on tonight's live, because there's quite a bit of XRP news to go through on tonight's live, which is, what everybody loves to hear, including myself. So here it is. Welcome to the CMF Live if you're watching this for the first time ever. The CMF stands for Crypto House Family. My name is Miles. You can tune to this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards for the most recent news regarding cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Pretty much everything you need to know about regarding the world completely transforming into a digital sector. Disclaimer of this live show, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. This is episode 467 of the CMF Live Show. For some reason, yesterday I titled the episode 400. Oh, yeah, for some reason yesterday I titled the episode 465. It was incorrect. It was 466. Today's is 467. Now, on tonight's live show, we're going to be talking about essentially Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, what's happening inside the market space so far with this whole essentially war scenario. Then we're going to go essentially into some prospective news of what's happening essentially in terms of the Euro market space of, trying to compete with a essentially digital dollars or even trying to take over is what they're trying to aim to do. We're also going to talk about tonight's live show regarding essentially Wisdom Tree's perspective. We're going to go for news on tonight's live show regarding essentially Coinbase's newest movements inside the market space. We're going to go for news on tonight's live show also regarding the Clarity Act, which is something that we all want inside the crypto space, but a perspective from Charles Hoskin, essentially the founder of Cardano. Then we're going to go through news on tonight's live show regarding essentially 401ks that could essentially be opening their doors towards the crypto space, which is absolutely massive. We're also going to talk about on tonight's live show regarding Google. We talked about Google yesterday on this live show regarding the quantum computing chip. Today, we got some new information on the Google quantum computing chip, essentially, and the deadline of 2029. We're also going to talk about tonight's live show regarding Ripple. We have an incredible amount of, you could say, XRP and Ripple news to go through on tonight's live show. But before we bring any of that, and the first news we are going to cover on tonight's live show is, what's happening right now inside the crypto market space regarding Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, oil, stock market, and so on. Let's go to the comment section first. Let's see what's happening there, and then we go straight into the first news. By the way, if you haven't already, like and retweet this live show. I can see that reposted by One Love. Thank you so much for liking and reposting. CMF members, if you haven't liked or retweeted, like and retweet this live show, it's going to be quite a lot of XRP news to go from tonight's live show. So, as I said, let's go through the comment section first before we do start this live. Into the first news. Good evening, Miles. I'm sure you've got some great information tonight as normal. Let's go, Addy. How you doing? Morning, everyone. Shelly, good to see you all morning. How you doing? Good evening, Miles and CMF. Paul XRP, good to see you as well. How you doing? Let's go, JP. Hi, Miles. Artistic, good to see you as well. How you doing? Big things are coming. They are for sure. Facts. Scott, let's go. How you doing? Hey there. Good night, Miles. Ian, good to see you as well. How you doing? Let's go, JP. Hello, Miles on CMF. I hope everyone had a good day. Let's go, Scott. How you doing? Share the live. Let's go, Scott. Hi, Miles. What's happening in April, on 11th of April? Is this the boom date? It's April has been suggested as the date for the deadline for a Clarity Act, but it's end of April is what's been suggested. Substacks, the risk, what could break this system? Go, Miles. This is our guy. Support his Substacks. Thank you so much, Scott, for mentioning that. If you haven't seen my Substacks, go and listen to them. You can listen to them. You don't have to read them if you don't want to. You can read them or listen to them. Even Miles is CMF. Jason, thank you. It's good to see you. How you doing? Now, first news on tonight's live show. It's regarding what's happening so far. So, Bitcoin and digital asset equities rally as crude oil prices retreat on a potential de-escalation. So it seems like the Iranian government, or whatever is left from the Islamic Republic of Iran, is pleading for some sort of an end or a pause to this war, which is why the crypto market space has eased Bitcoin and crypto-related stocks experienced a sharp upward essentially move following reports that Iran may be willing to end essentially its current conflicts, a development that immediately cooled the global energy markets pretty much instantly. As crude oil prices slid from recent highs and investors pivoted back towards a risk-sensitive assets, viewing the potential diplomatic breakthrough essentially as a stabilization signal for the 2026 digital economy. This shift highlights the growing role of decentralized settlement layers as liquidity barometer, essentially reacting in real time to the geopolitical shifts that impact traditional commodities and volatility and global commerce. The market's reaction to de-escalation reports underscores several evolving dynamics within the world's financial architecture: inversion of energy and digital asset volatility. The decline in oil prices has reduced immediate inflationary drag on the national, essentially financial infrastructure, allowing institutional on ramps to redeploy capital into high performance ledgers. Essentially, infrastructure and equities. Shares in mining firms and exchange platforms saw a significant bounce, closing the trust gap created by recent market uncertainty and aligning with the long-term essentially growth goals of the Genius Act. Efficiency of real-time price discovery. The 24/7 nature of the unified ledger allowed for essentially instant pricing of essentially a piece divided, providing a functional proof of concept for how modern financial plumbing handles rapid geopolitical essentially news cycles. As diplomatic efforts continue, the focus remains on whether this belief rally can sustain enough momentum essentially to break Bitcoin out of its recent 50-day constellation corridor. Analysts also suggest that a permanent reduction essentially in regional tensions could act as a catalyst for the total overall of global payment essentially rails. As lower energy costs improve the margins for high utility network participants moving forward, and the industry is watching for a formal signing of a de-escalation agreement, a milestone that could trigger a new wave of institutional capital and further solidifying the role of digital assets in the 2026 landscape. So, Iran has essentially, came to their knees, you could pretty much say, and is begging the United States and Israel to stop this war. It could have something to do with the recent, essentially, missile that was dropped on Isfahan, essentially, is one of the biggest cities in Iran. And that missile did do quite a bit of damage, and we're hearing news from essentially Islamic Republic of Iran, or whatever's left from the Iranian government, that they're pleading right now for this war to stop. Hence why the market space, oil went down in price, energy prices are going down, which is good. Crypto is going up, which is good. Stock market is slowly starting to pick up some movement, which is good. Is this going to last? Pretty much no. This is just a temporary, essentially, relief for the market space, warming itself up for the next stage. But still, crypto is still holding its ground. Obviously today is a bit up. It's 1 to 2% up, mainly because of, Iran's on its knees begging the United States not to missile them anymore. But this is going to continue, obviously. We know that US soldiers on foot are going to be entering Iran, so this war is obviously going to continue, but this is a temporary relief for the market space. What we're more interested in, obviously, rather than temporary relief for the market space, is a Clarity Act, because that's a foundational relief for the market space, not just a temporarily 2 to 3 day relief for the market space. But anyways, that is why the crypto market space, the stock market, and the energy prices came down, because the Iranian government, who pretends to be the most powerful government on the planet, is right now on its knees begging the United States and Donald Trump and Israel to stop missiling them. And essentially, that is why the crypto market space essentially had some sort of a relief today. But moving on from that and putting that to one side, let's talk about essentially some news that's coming from the European side. Europe, for a while now, you could pretty much say, even last year they talked about it. Europe is slightly fed up that essentially, American payment systems are advancing so much, and they have so much market share, not just in the European market space but also around the world. And Europe saw that this digitalization of essentially blockchain technology, digital euros or tokenization, this could be the moment that Europe decides to put themselves on the map and get recognized essentially, as a competitor in the currency field against the US dollars. Is that a dream? Is that a pipe dream? Or is that essentially a reality? In my point of view, it's a pipe dream for Europe to even consider the fact that they could go head to head with the US dollars, because even in a digital form, essentially, Tether is leading the routes right now. USDC is pretty much second, and then you go down the list with RUSD, PYUSD, and so on and so on. So, however, Europe is not giving up on their pipe dream whatsoever, and to be frank, this actually works out in our favor. The more Europe, decides to push and become competitive inside its digital space and push the digital euros, the better it is for us, because more people will enter the crypto space, even if it is from from stable coins. But stable coins eventually lead to XRP, XLM, XDC, HBAR, AVAX, Solana, Ethereum, Bitcoin. You get the picture. Some people start off going straight for cryptocurrencies, and some people start off by going for stable coins. And this could be other people's route into the crypto market space to provide liquidity down the road. So, Quillis CEO warns of digital dollarization risk in Europe due to a lack of euro-backed stablecoins. The CEO of Quillis essentially has issued a stark warning regarding Europe's increasing reliance on USD, essentially dominant digital assets, suggesting a regional face a digital dollarization crisis if a competitive euro stablecoin is not prioritized. As the 2026 digital economy continues its rapid expansion, the absence of a dominant euro-pegged stablecoin layer is essentially forcing European businesses to conduct global commerce essentially using American infrastructure. This trend threatens to undermine Europe's sovereignty within the world's financial architecture, as the efficiency of a unified ledger currently favors the greenback, the US dollars, as the default medium of exchange essentially of payments. The CEO analysis highlights several critical vulnerabilities in the current financial landscape for the European market space. Erosion of monetary autonomy. Without a native high utility stablecoin, European firms are increasingly subject to the rules of the road set by the United States regulators and the Federal Reserve's monetary policy shift. Friction in cross border settlements. The reliance on the dollar based essentially on ramps creates unnecessary conversion essentially costs and latency, hindering the efficiency and cost reduction goals envisioned for a total overhaul of the regional plumbing. Lagging institutional adoption. While the US Clarity Act has provided a framework essentially for dollar backed assets, the European market trust gap remains wider due to a lack of deep, liquid, euro dominated essential liquidity pools. As this warning circulates among the EU policymakers, the focus remains on whether the European Central Bank or private issuers will accelerate the development of a viable alternative. Analysts suggest that the 2026 landscape requires a multi-currency digital framework to ensure that the global financial architecture remains balanced and competitive. Moving forward, the industry is watching for new legislative incentives in Brussels, essentially, that could trigger a surge in euro-backed settlement layers, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and transparency of the continent's financial plumbing. Europe wants to compete with the US dollars, the digital US dollars, USDT, USDC, RLUSD, PYUSD. You get the picture. Good. Honestly, the more essentially, countries or continents in this sense, essentially get on board the idea of they need to compete, they need to become competitive inside digital market space, the better it works out for us. Because they will be rushing their timelines, essentially, their deadlines to get it out inside the market space, to get more people involved in digital, essentially in the blockchain space, which works out better for us because we've been inside the market space for the longest time. Wisdom Tree is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live show. Moving away from Europe to Wisdom Tree. Wisdom Tree executives argues that the Clarity Act promotes innovation rather than acting as a regulatory gatekeeper. A senior executive at Wisdom Tree has pushed back against the claims that the US Clarity Act serves as a restrictive barrier for the digital asset sector, arguing instead that it provides the essential framework for a responsible growth. By establishing clear rules of the road, the legislation allows institutional on-ramps to move away from the uncertainty of the past and towards a high utility integration with the national financial infrastructure. This perspective suggests a standardized, essentially legal environment is a requirement for the 2026 digital economy, enabling a systematic participants to build essentially products that meet the transparency and reporting goals necessary for a widespread adoption. The executive's analysis identifies several ways the Clarity Act supports the evolution of the world's financial essentially steps. Foundation for institutional trust. Providing essentially a definitive legal status for various token types helps close the trust gap for professional allocators who were previously hesitant to interact with a essentially unverified settlement layers. Simplest way to put that is essentially the trust inside the market space. Retail section up to a certain extent trusts obviously the crypto space. However, the institutional sector is something that we talked about yesterday. High net worth clients, family offices, hedge funds, and so on, they struggled with the idea of buying cryptocurrencies off essentially crypto exchanges, or going for a tangible wallet and so on. They prefer the institutions that they've trusted over the years to handle everything for them. And some didn't even want to enter the crypto space due to essentially uncertainty of, is there anything really backing these crypto assets and so on. But with a Clarity Act essentially being pushed and slowly going to be passed, or hopefully fast, essentially April is what's been suggested for the Clarity Act to be fully signed and dotted. This could essentially make a lot of investors enter the market space because it's no longer speculative or unverified. It's more like verified in a mature market space. Alignments with modern productivity. The acts essentially focus on automated compliance and aligns with the efficiency and cost reduction standards envisioned in the Genius Act, allowing firms to focus on building high performance technology rather than navigating legal ambiguity, which is brilliant. It just basically means that crypto exchanges or crypto companies or blockchain foundation or developers don't need to really worry about the legal side. If the Clarity Act gets passed, they can focus more on innovation and grow the United States market space. Catalyst for global commerce. A stable domestic regulatory environment serves as a functional proof of concept for other nations and potentially essentially leading to a harmonized international framework for the total overhaul of legacy financial plumbing. As the industry continues to adapt to this legislative landscape, the focus remains on whether these new standards will successfully trigger a wave of sophisticated financial products, and analysts suggest that the clarity essentially provided by the Act is a signal that essentially that the era of regulatory fog is ending and replaced by a much more mature and transparent pillar of the 2026 landscape. Moving forward, the industry is watching for the first major suit of the clarity compliant investment vehicles to hit the market, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and accessibility of the world's financial plumbing. So that is the perspective of Wisdom Tree today. There's pretty much essentially saying the Clarity Act is a green light for the crypto space. It doesn't hinder growth. It doesn't essentially stifle innovation in any sort of a way. And it actually gives room and breathing space for essentially the crypto companies to be able to grow, bring some innovations out of the market space rather than, being paranoid or too much focused on the regulation side. Because there are people on the other side of the spectrum who are crypto CEOs or crypto founders who are arguing that the Clarity Act doesn't really give them what they want. And there are some crypto CEOs that argue, yes, it does. And Wisdom Tree is on their side saying, yes, it does. It gives you space for innovation. Now, Coinbase is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live show. We're going to come back to that a little bit later on with another perspective from the other side of the spectrum. But for now, Coinbase. Coinbase's base network shift essentially streak focus towards tokenized markets and stablecoin expansion. As everybody should know, base network pretty much is Coinbase's lifeline, you could pretty much say, inside the blockchain space. And their focus is right now going towards tokenization and stablecoin expansions, which are two great areas to be in, regarding the crypto space right now. Coinbase has announced a major streak essentially pivot for its layer 2 network base, prioritizing the development of tokenized real-world assets and stablecoin utility for the remainder of 2026. This move marks a transition towards the high utility financial applications within the 2026 digital economy, and moving away from speculative old guard retail trends of previous cycles by incentivizing essentially developers to build sophisticated on-ramps for institutional capital. And Base is also positioning itself as a primary settlement layer for global commerce, aiming to integrate traditional private equities and credit markets directly into the world's essentially financial architecture. The updated roadmap from essentially Base's ecosystem highlights several transformative essentially goals for the national financial infrastructure. Institutional asset tokenization is one of them. The network aims to provide a verifiable proof of concept for moving trillions in legacy assets onto a unified ledger and aligning with the transparency and reporting standards of the US Clarity Act. Stablecoin first payment rails is another pillar they're focusing on. By focusing on low cost real time settlements for stablecoins, Base is working towards the efficiency and cost reduction standards envisioned in the Genius Act and fostering a total overhaul of the nation's financial plumbing. And another one they're focusing on right now is developer centric growth. New grants and infrastructure tools are designed to close the trust gap for professionals and builders, ensuring that the decentralized applications can meet the high performance demands of the 2026 landscape. As new developments initiatives take essentially hold, the focus remains on whether Base can successfully capture essentially a significant portion of the institutional market share. Analysts suggest that the shift towards tokenization is a requirement for the next phase of growth and the world's financial plumbing as it emerges the speed of digital essentially assets with the stability of traditional finance. And moving forward, the industry is watching for the first major partnership between a systematic bank and Base network, a milestone that could permanently redefine the accessibility and transparency of the 2026 global economy. It seems like essentially, Coinbase is shifting their thought pattern, you could pretty much say. They're going more towards right now tokenization or essentially expanding on their stablecoin. Good. Maybe their focus is get off of yield for time being so the Clarity Act could get passed. But, good. Coinbase, massive deal, essentially going further into tokenization, potentially could provide a lot more liquidity towards the table for the rest of the crypto space as well, indirectly. Brilliant. Now, Charles is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's slideshow. So, putting the Coinbase news to one side, let's talk about Charles. As I was saying, there are two perspectives on the Clarity Act. There is the perspective that the Clarity Act is positive and we should just pass it. There is the other perspective on the Clarity Act, which is it only works well with certain crypto projects and not the rest of the market space. And there's another one as well where they want yields for stablecoins, but that's only, essentially Coinbase that wants that. Charles is what we're talking about next, the founder of Cardano. Charles warns of a potential weaponization of the US Clarity Act by future lawmakers. Cardano's founder Charles has voiced a strong opposition to the US Clarity Act, cautioning that the legislation could be transformed into a tool for political overreach. To be fairly honest, Charles, any legislation could be essentially used as a tool for political overreach, not just the Clarity Act. But let's go on. While many institutional participants view the Act as a necessary set of rules of the road for the 2026 digital economy, Charles argues that the framework grants excessive dictionary essentially power to federal agencies. This centralized authority, he suggests, creates a systematic risk where future administrations could target specific decentralized protocols and potentially stifling the very innovation the world's financial architecture was designed to protect. Charles' critique identifies several primary concerns regarding the long term impact of the national financial infrastructure. Risk of selective enforcement is one of the pillars essentially Charles is worried about. The broad definitions within the Act may allow regulators to gatekeep which settlement layers are deemed compliant and creating an uneven playing field for emerging high utility technologies. Charles was worried about that essentially with a Clarity Act in the way. With this particular Clarity Act, there could be a pick and choose type of moment where essentially people behind the legislation could say this crypto project green light, that one red light, or this part of the crypto project green light, that part of the crypto project red light. And he's saying that could cause some sort of disruptions down the line. Centralization of oversight. By consolidating the power within traditional federal structures, the legislation may move away from the decentralized proof of concept and that originally defined the industry and potentially hindering the total overhaul of legacy plumbing. Threat to global permissionless commerce. Charles warns that if the US framework becomes too restrictive, it could force a migration of talent and capital to move to more open jurisdictions, undermining the efficiency and cost reduction goals envisioned in the Genius Act. As the debate over the Clarity Act intensifies, the focus remains on whether the current administration will address these concerns and through further legislative essentially reaffirmance Analysts suggest that the trust gap between decentralized developers and federal regulators remains a significant hurdle for the 2026 landscape. And moving forward, the industry is right now watching for any legal challenges or proposed amendments that could balance the need for transparency with the fundamental principles of decentralized settlement layers. Okay, a lot of people need to understand, even people like Charles need to understand. I'm not trying to say, I'm not acting in any sort of a cocky way or trying to say more intelligent or as anybody else out there and so on. But look, some people need to understand something very basic. We live, as much as we have a human rights essentially or freedom of speech and so on. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Our human rights is it could become restricted depending on what we do in society. Our freedom of speech could also become restricted depending on what we say in society. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And this is the world we're living in. The idea that we're going to go into a digital world, and I wrote a Substacks about this as well, the idea, which is going to be coming out on Sunday, the idea that we're going to go into a digital world and the very foundation of a digital world is decentralization is stupid. Because if we live in a world like right now, where, depending on what you say and what you do, your human rights or essentially your freedom of speech could be taken away, doesn't matter where you live in this planet, it can be taken away. Um, so understanding that's essentially point. And then thinking to yourself, we're going to go into a digital world and it's going to be decentralization. Everybody could do whatever they want. It's just stupid. Elements of centralization are always going to exist inside of a decentralized world. Always going to be something that governs it. It's always going to be like that. It's not going to be a fully decentralized world, and we're never going to get a fully decentralized world. What we're going to get instead is a hybrid model, which is essentially a decentralized world with elements of centralization. Because if we don't have those elements of centralization, then there's no governing. If there's no governing, then anything can happen on the market space, which means illegal money, terror funding, and the list just goes on. So the idea of a decentralized world, a fully decentralized world, everybody needs to take that thought of a fully decentralized world and throw it away, because that's never going to happen. We live in a non-digital world up to a certain extent right now, and we don't have that freedom of decentralization. You know what I'm talking about. But going into a digital world, for some reason, people think it's going to be fully decentralized. Everybody could do whatever they want. No, we don't have those rights now. Why do people assume we're going to have those rights in a digital world where things could become more restrictive? So a hybrid model is what we're going towards. Decentralization with elements of centralization. So if anybody's actually, even people like Charles who might be thinking to themselves, this Clarity Act needs to have more decentralization. Otherwise, we need to go back to the drawing boards. You're never going to get fully decentralization in this world. It's just never going to happen. We live in a very restrictive, up to a certain extent, human rights and freedom of speech world. Going to a digital world, that makes it essentially more restrictive if you think about it. So it's a hybrid model, what we're going to be living in pretty much. So people like Charles, just let the Clarity Act get passed. We should be thankful we even have a Clarity Act at this point. Let's just get it past the finishing line. If you want to add things to it, add things to it later. But going back to the drawing board isn't going to help anyone. Now, moving on from Charles's La La Land perspective to potential US essentially rule change that could unlock trillions in 401ks, a capital for digital asset markets. So, 401ks market space opening their doors towards the crypto space. It's $1 trillion market space. Massive. It's going to be huge for us. Before we talk about that, let's go start the conversation first. Let's see what's happening there, and then go straight into the next news. So, let's see where we were at. We were at here. Good evening, Miles. How are you? I'm doing great, Callie. Good to see you. How you doing? Actually, I think we were further up, I'll be honest. You were Jason, good to see you. How you doing? Paul, good to see you. How you doing? Free Forever, good to see you. How you doing? Scott, let's go. Congratulations on episode 467. Thank you so much, Scott. Kelly, good to see you. How you doing? Evening. I didn't doubt about it. Iran will essentially crotched as everything is coordinated, pretty much. Remember Miles, stop stacks. Let's go. No financial advice. I am all in on XRP. I am watching the institutions. I am not leaving the XRP area, seeing what I see. Let's go. Hit the like button. Let's go if you believe in XRP. How has your day been, Miles and family? Lena's been good. How's your day been? Let's go. Scott, hi Miles and CMF. Keith, good to see you. How you doing? Hello, Miles and CMF. Manny, good to see you. How you doing? How you been, brother? Let's get the act passed, then make adjustments later. Otherwise, this ridiculous jargon causes essential procrastination, or essentially it never gets done. Facts, absolute facts. I am eccentric. I want the need, this clarity act to get passed. Miles, use your just get this done. Like, just do it. Let's go. So, 401ks. A proposed shift in federal labor, essentially retirement regulations, may soon allow for the integration of digital assets in the $7 trillion essentially market space of 401ks. This policy adjustment targets the old guard restrictions that historically limited retirement plans and essentially from, among other exposures, the decentralized settlement layers. By modernizing the rules of the road for employer sponsored plans, the current administration, Trump's administration, is creating a high utility bridge between the 2026 digital economy and the long term savings of millions of Americans, potentially triggering a total overhaul of the nation's retirement infrastructure. The move to permit digital assets and retirement accounts highlights several shifts within the national financial infrastructure. Institutional on ramps. Allowing 401k participants to allocate a portion of their essential portfolio to digital ledgers provides retail savers with the same high performance tools previously reserved for systematic, essentially, hedge funds. Closing the trust gap for essentially this movement, the rule change provides a functional proof of concept for the safety and transparency standards envisioned in the US Clarity Act, giving plan administrators essentially the legal cover needed to offer new asset classes. Diversification against traditional shocks. Prominents argue that adding a non-correlated digital assets to retirement pools improves the resilience of the world's financial architecture against the volatility of legacy equity and bond markets. Alignments with modern productivity. The inclusion of digital assets and mainstream saving vehicles supports the cost reductions and efficiencies also. Long-term capital for global governments. A steady inflow of retirement capital could provide a permanent liquidity floor for the 2026 landscape, essentially in stabilizing the unified ledger as a pillar of the world's financial planning. If we get 401ks entering the crypto, towards crypto space, it's roughly a $7 trillion market space. It's a massive market space. We're not expecting the entire budget to go towards cryptocurrencies, but portions of allocations from 401k essentially accounts is a massive deal already. But that could create a floor for the crypto space, a very, very strong floor that we could keep on bouncing off essentially until we get a Clarity Act passed, or essentially until we see that the utility side of cryptocurrencies coming through. Modernizing the settlement layer of wealth. Shifting retirement savings towards cryptographically essentially secured assets represents a definitive step in the evolution of how nations manage its collective future essentially wealth. As the Department of Labor moves towards a final decision, the focus remains on guardrails that will be implemented to protect less experienced investors from market swings. Analysts suggest that the entry of even a small fraction of a 401k capital is a requirement essentially for the next phase of maturity in the world's financial architecture, as it signals the final seal of approval from the federal oversight bodies. And moving forward, the industry is watching for the first major payroll that provides essentially the providers to integrate these digital on-ramps, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and accessibility of the world's financial plumbing for the next generation. 401ks entering the crypto space is a huge deal, a massive deal. Again, we're not expecting the entire budget, essential 401ks, to go towards it, or everybody essentially who has a 401k to be allocating the entire portfolio towards cryptocurrencies, but even a portion of allocation from them could create a very, very strong foundation for the crypto space that we could keep on bouncing off depending on which crypto assets they choose. And eventually, if people get comfortable with their 401ks being cryptocurrencies, they can increase their allocations. That's when we start seeing the rest of that $7 trillion. Now, Google is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live show. So putting that on one side, which is exceptional, brilliant news. Yesterday, we talked about Google's quantum computing chip, which is has a deadline of 2029, which is a massive threat to Bitcoin, a massive threat to the traditional banking sector, but also, according to documents that were released today, a massive threat to Ethereum. So, here it is. Google's cybersecurity division has issued a high priority technical warning, essentially identifying five distant attack paths that could allow future quantum computers to compromise over $100 billion in value in currently secured on Ethereum's network. This advisory highlights essentially a critical vulnerability in the 2026 digital economy, especially targeting the epileptic curve cryptography that protects the majority of active wallets and smart contracts. By exposing these potential shocks to the world's financial architecture, Google is urging a rapid transition towards a post-quantum standards to prevent a systematic failure of national financial infrastructure. The five identified attack paths essentially focus on several foundational weaknesses within the current system, essentially when it comes to Ethereum. So it's not just Bitcoin that becomes compromised, it's also Ethereum and also traditional banking sector that becomes compromised when it comes to cryptocurrencies. And ironically, there was a document that was with the SEC regarding, they did some sort of a report regarding quantum computing, and they did say in their own documents that essentially Bitcoin and Ethereum are the two high targets essentially for quantum computing chips that could become very compromised. Bitcoin, Ethereum are pretty much number one to become compromised compared to any other chain out there. Public key. Quantum algorithms could potentially derive private keys from public addresses, breaking the trust gap for long term holders and institutional on ramps. Validator signature spoofing. Attackers could intercept and forge validator signatures, undermining essentially the consensus mechanisms that ensures the integrity of a unified ledger. This is essentially from Google's own reports that were released today on CoinDesk. Smart contract logic essentially exploits. Vulnerabilities in how decentralized applications verify data could be manipulated, threatening the global commerce rails built on the Ethereum essentially virtual machine. Flash loans, essentially, and liquidity manipulation. High speed quantum calculations essentially could allow for a front running of transactions at a scale that legacy defense mechanisms cannot essentially counteract. Cross chain bridge compromises. The high performance links between different networks remain a primary target, as their security often relies on the same old guard encryption methods flagged by Google. As Ethereum developers weigh in on these essentially findings, the focus remains on the feasibilities of a total overhaul of the network's cryptographic foundations before the 2029 deadline. Analysts suggest that implementing a quantum resistance proofs is a functional requirement for the efficiency and safety standards envisioned in the Genius Act. And moving forward, the industry is right now watching for the first ever quantum safe improvement proposals to be integrated in 2026, a milestone that could permanently redefine the resilience of the security of the world's next financial payment system. We're going to come back to that. We're going to quantum computing chips, but on the topic of who is actually quantum resistant. But before we talk about that, actually, you know what? Let's just go. Let's just go to the next news, which is regarding Ripple and XRP, because I've just given you a hint of which blockchain potentially is essentially quantum resistant proof. But putting that to one side for now, let's just talk about essentially the EEA in terms of essentially major tokens that they've listed. And one of them is XRP. So let's go into Ripple XRP news today because there's quite a bit to go through on Ripple XRP side. Interactive Brokers expands digital asset access for EEA clients with support for major tokens. Interactive essentially brokers have announced today a significant expansion of their digital asset services, now offering clients in the European Economic Area the ability to trade and hold Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and XRP. This development marks a major milestone for institutional on-ramps within the European essentially market space, allowing professional and retail investors alike to manage digital holdings alongside traditional equities and bonds on a single essentially platform. By integrating those high utility assets into its established essentially brokerage infrastructure, Interactive Brokers is effectively bridging the trust gap for sophisticated allocators seeking to diversify within the 2026 digital economy. The inclusion of XRP's ledger, essentially XRP Ledger's native token, and other essentially prominent networks highlights several shifts in the world's financial architecture. Unified, essentially multi-asset on-ramps, providing a single essential interference for both old guard securities and decentralized settlement layers, and fulfilling a key essential requirement for the total overhaul of modern portfolio management. Compliance with regional standards. The rollout aligns with the rigorous transparency and reporting goals of the European MiCA regulations, serving as a functional proof of concept for regulated digital commerce. Enhanced liquidity for global trade. By opening the gates to a vast pool of EEA capital, those networks essentially gain the systematic depth needed to support the efficiency and cost reduction standards envisioned in the Genius Act. Validation of high performance ledgers. The selection of assets like XRP and Solana underscores an institutional performance for speed and low cost settlements with the national financial infrastructure. The closing of the essentially professional trust gap, utilizing a legacy brokerage for digital custody, provides a stable rule of the road for firms that were previously hesitant to interact with unverified exchange platforms. A pillar for the 2026 landscape, this expansion reinforces the role of a unified ledger as a permanent fixture in the world's financial plumbing, facilitating the seamless movements of a value across borders. As European investors gain direct access to these assets through a trusted intermediary, the focus remains on whether this move will trigger a broader wave of adoption across other major global brokerages. Analysts suggest that the integration of digital assets into mainstream investments vehicles is essentially for the long-term stability of the world's essentially next financial essentially setup of a payment. Moving forward, the industry is right now trying to see the first quarterly report reflecting the volume of the EEA digital asset trades, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and accessibility of the world's financial essentially structure. Now, on the topic essentially of XRP, Ripple, and so on, new US bank rule effective April 1st clears regulatory path for institutional Ripple adoption. So let me explain. A pivotal shift in the US banking landscape is set to take place on April 1st. This is not April Fool's, this is essentially an actual deadline. As a new federal rule change officially streamlines the process for traditional financial institutions to engage with digital asset service providers starting April 1st. This regulatory update is widely seen as a major win for Ripple, significantly lowering the hurdles for systematic banks to integrate the XRP ledger into their existing core infrastructure by providing essentially a clear path for the custody and settlement of digital assets. The current administration is listing a high utility bridge between traditional finance and the digital sector, and April 1st seems to be the start of crypto connecting to the banking system. The implementation of this new banking rule highlights several transformative shifts within the national financial sector. Elimination of essentially institutional trust gaps. The rule provides a definitive legal framework that allows banks, compliance officers to essentially approve Ripple-based settlement layers with the same confidence as traditional wire systems. Alignments with federal transparency goals. The guidelines mirror the rigorous reporting and oversight standards envisioned in the US Clarity Act, ensuring that all digital asset flows remain fully auditable and compliant. Also, on the topic of auditable, Ripple's RLUSD token, essentially stablecoin, was audited today to be fully 100% backed. Just for reassurance for anyone out there. Acceleration of a total overhaul of payments. As banks gain the green light to utilize XRP Ledger or start working with Ripple April 1st, the efficiency and cost reduction goals of the Genius Act moves closer to becoming a reality for everyday global commerce. A functional proof of concept for unified ledgers. The integration of Ripple's technology into a tier 1 bank balance sheet serves as a pillar for the 2026 landscape and providing that decentralized technology can coexist with regulated banking, streamlining global liquidity and on-ramps. By removing legacy friction, this rule change allows for faster migration of trillions in capital towards high-performance digital asset settlement layers and modernizing the world's financial plumbing. The transition of this is beginning April 1st, which is pretty much tomorrow. It represents a requirement for the next phase of the world's financial architecture, where the speed of XRP Ledger becomes a standard for institutional trade. As the April 1st deadline arrives, the focus remains on which major US institutions will be the first to publicly announce their XRP-based payment initiatives. So, essentially from April 1st, which is tomorrow, from April 1st tomorrow onwards, we should be expecting some sort of announcements essentially from tomorrow onwards. Not tomorrow exactly. If we do get exactly tomorrow, absolutely amazing. But from tomorrow onwards, we should be getting some sort of announcements coming out regarding this bank and XRP, that bank and XRP, or this institution and the XRP, and so on and so on. Because tomorrow is pretty much the green light day, you can pretty much say, for the banking sector to be able to work with essentially the crypto space, specifically essentially Ripple, which leads back to the XRP Ledger and XRP. Now, analysts suggest that this rule change is a signal that regulatory fog has essentially finally lifted, allowing for more transparent and stable worlds of financial architecture. And moving forward, the industry is watching for a surge in institutional transaction volumes on the ledger, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed of essentially this accessibility of the financial plumbing and essentially the world going digital and moving forward. So, tomorrow, essentially April 1st, onwards, we should be getting announcements from banks greenlighting XRP, greenlighting essentially Ripple partnerships, or any sort of movements in that sort of category. Essentially, is what's been suggested from April 1st onwards. So let's see from April 1st onwards, are we going to get these announcements coming in, or do we have to get that Clarity Act passed before we get any of those announcements coming in? Now, also, the XRP Ledger becomes the primary payment backbone for BitGet Wallet as RRUSD gains traction. BitGet Wallet has officially integrated the XRP Ledger as a foundational payment rail, signaling a major leap in the real-world utility of decentralized settlement layers. This integration is largely driven by deployments of Ripple's essentially USD peg stablecoin, RRUSD essentially, which provides the high-performance liquidity necessary for global commerce within essentially the 2026 landscape. By leveraging the XRP Ledger's native speed and low-cost architecture, BitGet is offering millions of users a seamless on-ramp to institutional-grade digital finance, effectively bridging that gap, once again with the traditional market space and the crypto space. On that topic, essentially, there are a few essentially bullet points we should go through regarding RRUSD essentially and BitGet's wallet's foundation right now for the XRP Ledger. Stablecoin driven settlements. The use of RRUSD provides a reliable USD-backed medium for daily transactions, meeting the transparency and reporting goals of essential essentially for institutional trust and the US Clarity Act. As I said today, RRUSD was fully audited to be 100% backed, as they say they are. Mass market on-ramps. By embedding the XRP Ledger directly into a major retail wallet, the network is achieving a functional proof of concept for the total overhaul of consumer payment plumbing. Also, efficiency and scalability. The integration aligns with cost reduction standards envisioned in Genius Act, allowing for near-instant cross-border transfers within the friction of traditional intermediary banks. Institutional alignments. BitGet's move reflects a growing trend of systematic providers choosing the XRP Ledger for its regulatory-friendly essential rules of the road and high utility features. Evolving the unified ledger. This partnership strengthens the role essentially of the XRP Ledger as a primary pillar for 2026. Interpolable essentially global commerce. The ability to move value across different regions using a single high-performance ledger simplifies the complexities of the modern financial plumbing. As RLUSD continues to drive adoption, the focus remains on whether other major wallet providers will follow Bitget's lead in adopting the XRP ledger for their primary settlement needs. Analysts suggest that the combination of a trusted stablecoin and a battle-tested ledger is a requirement for major migration of essentially the retail and corporate volumes to 2026 global economy. Moving forward, the industry right now is watching for the first $1 billion month in RLUSD transaction volumes on the ledger, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and the cost efficiencies of using the XRP ledger, or essentially Bitget being the essentially the test zone for the world to see the XRP ledger in full action of in terms of the RLUSD token. Now, also on the topic of essentially of XRP, RLUSD, and Ripple. Ripple Prime unlocks institutional access to gold, silver, oil on hyper-essential liquids. Ripple Prime has officially expanded its institutional suite by enabling access to gold, silver, and oil contracts via essentially a hyperliquids platform. This move marks a significant bridge between traditional golds and commodities and the 2026 digital economy, allowing essentially participants to hedge against inflation and energy shocks within a high performance environment. By bridging these real world assets onto a decentralized settlement layer, essentially, Ripple Prime is providing the high utility tools necessary for modernizing global commerce and diversifying the world's financial architecture. The integration of commodity essentially contracts, oil contracts into Ripple Prime ecosystem highlights several transformative shifts. Tokenized commodity exposure. Institutional on-ramps can now gain 24/7 exposure to precious metals and energy without the friction of legacy brokerage plumbing, fulfilling a key proof of concept for the total overhaul of capital markets, because the XRP ledger could pretty much do that for you, or Ripple Prime could do that for you. Alignments with the essentially modern oversights. The platform structure is designed to meet the transparency and reporting goals of the US Clarity Act. Capital efficiency through cross managing. By allowing gold and oil to be traded alongside digital assets, the system realizes the cost reduction standards envisioned in the Genius Act and maximizing the utility of a unified ledger. Closing the trust gap for professional allocators, the use of auditable on chain price feeds for commodities ensures that the settlement is both verifiable and resistant to manipulation often associated with traditional DEX. Resilience in the 2026 landscape. As geopolitical tensions essentially fluctuate, the ability to rapidly shift between digital assets and hard commodities on a single ledger provides a vital, essentially, safety value for the national financial infrastructure. An evolving settlement layer for trade. This expansion signals a move towards a truly multi-asset world's financial architecture where the same high-speed rails essentially are used for payments now support complex derivatives and global resource hedging. Oil, gold, silver, Ripple Prime. As Ripple Prime rolls out these features to its global client base, the focus remains on liquidity flywheels, effect of merging commodity and crypto markets. Analysts suggest that the ability to trade traditional hedges on a digital ledger is a requirement for the final migration of this digital world that we're all going to be living in. And essentially, the industry is right now watching for the inclusion of additional real world assets like essentially agriculture products or carbon credits, a milestone that could permanently redefine the speed and transparency of the world's financial plumbing. Massive news, absolutely massive news regarding essentially Ripple Prime. So far, all of them have been extremely positive regarding Ripple news. April 1st onwards, we could be getting announcements essentially from XRP this or Ripple this regarding banks and major institutions. Also, essentially regarding gold, oil, silver, and essentially 24/7 contracts on Ripple Prime, absolutely amazing again. You know what's even better than that? That academic researchers position XRP Ledger as a global leader in quantum resistant financial technology. So while Bitcoin is sweating, Ethereum is sweating, and the traditional banking sector is also sweating on the idea of quantum computing chips could destroy pretty much everything they've built. Academic researchers are right now positioning XRP as essentially a global leader in quantum resistance. comprehensive new study from leading academic researchers has identified the XRP ledger as a primary frontrunner in the development of quantum resistant cryptographic standards. As the 2026 digital economy faces emerging threats from advanced essentially computing to peer-reviewed findings suggest that the XRP ledger's underlying architecture is uniquely suited for essentially the integration of a post-quantum signatures without sacrificing its trademark speed. By proactively addressing these future shocks to the world's financial architecture, the network is establishing a high utility defense for trillions in value currently migrating to decentralized settlement layers. The research highlights several key technical advantages that puts the XRP ledger above any other blockchain out there. Modular cryptographic agility. The ledger's design allows for the seamless hot swapping of signing algorithms, providing a functional proof of concept for the total overhaul of legacy encryptions. Alignments with federal security goals. The shift towards quantum resistance standards reflects the rigorous transparency and protection mandates envisioned in the US Clarity Act, securing institutional on-ramps against future systematic risks. Maintenance of high performance throughput. Unlike the old guard networks that may slow down on the complex new security laws, essentially layers, the XRP ledger is projected to maintain the efficiency and cost reduction standards, even essentially having them layers on them. Verifiable long-term settlements. Academic models essentially suggest that the XRP ledger's consensus mechanism is naturally more essentially resilient to the Shor's algorithm threats than the endangered essential traditional public key infrastructures. A safe haven, for global commerce. Typically, the words safe haven are always essentially are always used for Bitcoin. Bitcoin digital gold, Bitcoin safe haven, Bitcoin risk off asset. But in this time around, it's being used for the XRP ledger. The XRP ledger is being used as essentially is being seen as a safe haven for the world's essentially financial infrastructure in a quantum computing world. And closing also the trust gap, the move towards essentially post-quantum readiness provides the rules of the road necessary for systematic banks to commit long-term capital to the ledger with absolute certainty of its performance. As the industry moves closer to a projected quantum Y2K window, the focus remains on how quickly these academic recommendations can be implemented into the live mainnet. Analysts suggest that being quantum first is a requirement. Being quantum first is a requirement. And so far, above any other blockchain out there, the XRP ledger is leading in a quantum essentially proof world, is absolutely leading in this race. It is a requirement for any network serving as a definitive backbone for 2026 digital global economy. If you want to be a backbone of a digital world as a blockchain, then you need to be leading. I need to be first, quantum first, for you to be a backbone. And out of every blockchain out there, who's leading when it comes to quantum proofing? The XRP ledger. Moving forward, the industry is right now watching for the first live development of a post-quantum latency-based signature on the ledger, a milestone that could permanently redefine the security and resilience of the world's financial architecture. As always, the XRP ledger, XRP, RLUSD, Ripple are always 10 steps of everybody else around them. They're just always 10 steps ahead of everybody else around them. And today's role of news, essentially, regarding XRP, in terms of Google releasing their own documents, pretty much of who's going to be first to become uprise is pretty much Bitcoin and Ethereum. But then we have news from academic researchers coming out today, the same day that Bitcoin and Ethereum are looking weak in terms of a quantum essentially world. Some people might not like that. Some people might not want to believe that, but you can go and read the documents for yourself. But what is coming out today at the same time is essentially academic researchers coming out and saying the XRP ledger is actually leading when it comes to quantum proofing compared to anybody else around them. That is incredible news that came out today. The other incredible news that came out today is regarding Ripple Prime unlocking essentially institutional access to gold, silver, and oil contracts. That's absolutely amazing as well. The other essentially XRP news that came out today was the XRP ledger essentially become the backbone of BitGet's wallets for RLUSD. And the other amazing XRP news that came out today was regarding April 1st. Let's see what happens April 1st and beyond regarding XRP news announcements, XRP ledger announcements, Ripple announcements, and so on from institutions and banks. Or is it that we need the Clarity Act first before we get those announcements in the way? On that note of XRP pretty much leading the way in the side of this digital world that we're heading towards in terms of security, of never becoming compromised compared to anybody else around them, we have come to the endings of tonight's lives as well. This was the CMF live show. Stands for Crypto Miles Family. My name is Miles. You can tune to this live Monday, Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards for the most recent news regarding cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Pretty much all the information you need to know regarding the world completely transforming into digital space, and in some cases, how to protect yourself in a digital space. Disclaimer of this live show, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. This was episode 467 of the CMF live show. We had incredible amount of Ripple news to go through on tonight's live show. Now, before we do go obviously, let's go to the comment section first. Let's see what's happening there, and then we'll straight, essentially, then we'll call it a night. So let's see where we're at. So the comment section, just in case. Miles is in the zone. Let's go. Hi, Miles and CMF. Good to see you guys. Let's go Facts News. Let's go Carl. How's it going? It's going good with the house. Good to see you, brother. How you doing? Good news for XRP and the rest of the crypto fund. Yes, absolute facts. Hi, Miles. Is it going to be a big dump? Bad looks of it, no. Good evening, Miles. I remember a couple of years ago you mentioned Iran had a critical cable that other countries relied on. Why wouldn't they use that card in the war? Is this a war with Iran, the Black Swan? It was a communications internet cable under the ocean. Yes, they can't right now essentially get to that cable because of the immense amount of essentially US warships around it, to be fairly honest. And good that they can't get to it either. Great live, Miles. Keep up amazing work. Let's go Comatose. And thank you, Miles. Let's go Peg. Great live, Miles. Thank you. Good night, Miles and CMF. Let's go Jason. See you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. Peg, see you tomorrow, same time as usual. Of course, good to see you. How you doing? Going to see you tomorrow, same time as usual. Amazing news today. Thank you, Miles. Good night, everyone. Let's go Bull XRP. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. Good night, Miles and CMF. Great live and XRP news. Let's go. Thanks, Miles. See you tomorrow. Friend forever. See you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. Thank you a ton, Miles, for sharing all the crypto news. Have a lovely night, all. Lena, let's go. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. Howdy, everyone. Thompson, let's go. How you doing? See you tomorrow, Thompson. Much more earlier. Thanks, Miles, for this amazing live show. So many good news about XRP to protect ourselves financially on this digital market. Good night and sleep well, my friend. Let's go, Carl. See you tomorrow, sometimes usual as well. What are both your thoughts and opinions in regards to Flare Network? When it comes to Flare Network, for me, it's not a must in any sort of a way. It's a good project. It's a good network. It's a legit network. Do I think it's a must to have? No. I think you're better off being an XRP ledger than going for Flare tokens. If you want to stake, that's completely up to you. I wouldn't personally do that. Nothing wrong with that. It's just not my thing to stake my crypto assets. I don't like them to be trapped. I mean, obviously there is flexible staking, not locked. You know, you could do locked or flexible. Don't like the idea in any sort of a way, but some people do. But Flare, legit project. I want to say it's a must-have, and you're better off going for XRP instead. Let's go, Scott. Good night, brother Miles. T, let's go. See you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. I will see Ripple becoming a powerhouse. Great info as always, Miles. Thank you, and see you all tomorrow. Let's go, Shelly. See you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. Addy, thanks for another lovely evening. See you tomorrow, mate. Let's go, Addy. See you tomorrow, same time as usual as well. And absolutely correct. That is entirely my fault for not being on time. No problem, Thompson. I will see everybody tomorrow, same timing as usual. As you all know, the time essentially change has happened. We're 1 hour forward in terms of the UK time. But always remember 10 p.m. UK time, no matter what time difference we may be on, 10 p.m. UK time. And thanks for the insights on both Flare and XRP. Let's go, Thompson. I will see everybody tomorrow, same time as usual. Everybody have a great day or a good night, depending on where you're around the world. Love you all. Like, follow, share, comment, subscribe if you already haven't. If you have, thank you so much. See everybody tomorrow, same time as usual. And check out the Substacks if you already haven't. They're absolutely incredible.